The city breathed like a living creature. Narrow streets twisted between tall, aging apartment blocks, neon signs flickering like distant fires, and the smell of roasted peanuts and fresh bread mingling with smoke from passing cars. The market pulsed with energy. Women called out prices of yams and rice, children darted between legs, and traders haggled with sharp voices that cut through the morning hum. Here, wealth and poverty collided on every corner. In one street, sleek cars glided past cramped stalls where families hawked fruits. In another, alleyways hid secrets that whispered of hidden corruption. The city glimmered with opportunity, yet trembled under the weight of moral darkness, a place where life and danger walked hand in hand. Amali moved through this maze with quiet determination. Her hands bore the calluses of hard work, and her eyes reflected a mind sharpened by struggle. At dawn, she delivered parcels and cooked for her mother and younger siblings. By afternoon, she tended to odd jobs in the market, navigating the crowds with nimble feet. She greeted everyone with a soft smile, masking the fear that gnawed at her heart. Though intelligent and resilient, she remained vulnerable. The city judged her as it judged all women who walked alone. Cautious glances, whispered comments, subtle warnings. Yet she pressed on, determined to survive and protect her family in a world that often refused mercy. Oba's shadow stretched across the city like the dark reflection of his wealth. From a distance, he appeared as a pillar of respect, his suits crisp, his voice smooth in boardrooms, his charity carefully publicized. But behind closed doors, whispers of abuse lingered. Amala had learned to recognize the signs, the sudden demand, the sly manipulation, the way power could bend truth to its will. His towering buildings glimmered in the sunlight, monuments to his authority, yet they hid the darkness inside, a reminder that appearances could never be trusted. People bowed and smiled in his presence, unaware of the cruelty that festered behind the curtain of respect. Kofi walked beside his father one morning, shoulders tense, eyes cast downward. "Father, are you sure this is the right way?" he asked quietly, voice trembling between fear and doubt. Oba's gaze cut like a whip. "The world rewards those who take what is theirs, boy. Weakness is a luxury we cannot afford." Kofi's mind churned. He admired his father's power but recoiled at the moral cost. Every act of obedience that reinforced injustice weighed heavily on him. He had watched the city's alleys, the frightened faces, the whispers of families suffering quietly, and he wondered how much longer he could follow blindly. Somewhere inside, a seed of conscience had taken root, fragile yet insistent, hinting at a choice he would soon have to make, a choice that could define him as a man and determine the fate of many lives. The city's heartbeat quickened as if it knew change was coming. Neon lights flickered overhead, reflecting off wet pavement, casting shadows that danced like restless spirits. Amali's path crossed with power and danger. Kofi's conscience trembled under the weight of loyalty, and Oba's authority, though immense, began to reveal the cracks that even wealth could not conceal. In this city of light and shadow, the story of survival, betrayal, and awakening had only just begun. Amale's home was a small, weathered apartment perched above the bustling market streets. The walls, faded from years of sun and rain, seemed to bow under the weight of unspoken worries. Her mother, Nandi, moved quietly across the room, her hands always busy with chores that never ended. The younger siblings, 2 boys and a girl, huddled together, eyes wide as they whispered about school, food, and the day's small misfortunes. "Amale, you've been gone all morning," Nandi said, her voice soft but lined with worry. "The little ones are hungry, and I cannot carry this alone." Amale dropped her bag by the door, exhaustion etched into her face. "I'll take care of them, Mama. Always." She forced a smile, but inside a storm of fear and fatigue raged. The family depended on her strength, yet every decision she made carried the weight of survival. The city outside offered opportunity but demanded compliance, and in their poverty, even the smallest misstep could bring humiliation or worse. The shadows of Oba and Kofi's presence had already begun to creep into her life. A gift offered with a smile, a favor demanded as obligation, whispered promises and veiled threats. They made her heart pound with unease. "You must understand, Amala," Kofi's voice had said once, soft but insistent. "Sometimes survival requires sacrifices no one else can see." She felt trapped. Every alleyway she passed seemed narrower, every crowded street a maze of hidden eyes and silent judgment. The city pulsed with life, yet beneath its neon lights it concealed secrets, mirrors of the abuse that no one dared name. Each step carried her closer to danger, yet she moved forward, aware that retreat could mean disgrace for her family. In the quiet moments at home, Amale's mind wrestled with the harsh lessons of the streets. Power could be abused, the society could remain silent, but a choice existed. Morality could survive if one had the courage to act. She clutched her mother's worn hands, whispering promises of protection, of endurance. "We will survive this, Mama," she said. And though her voice trembled, there was steel beneath the fear. Outside, the city roared on, honking cars, shouting vendors, children racing across the streets. But within Amale, the tension simmered. Survival demanded compliance, yet justice demanded resistance. Each day, she would learn more about the cost of silence, the weight of betrayal, and the courage required to confront it. And so the stage was set. In the alleys and markets, amid the noise and shadows, a struggle between morality and survival had begun, and the city, with all its secrets and judgments, would bear witness. The city's streets had grown heavier with shadows, folding into alleyways that whispered secrets no one dared speak aloud. Each day, Amale walked them with a careful pace, her mind always alert, her spirit quietly battered. The abuses she endured left invisible scars, on her hands, on her heart, on her sense of belonging. Every encounter with Oba or Kofi chipped at her courage, yet each time she rose, her resilience deepened. Shadows stretched long across cracked pavement, echoing the darkness that crept into her life, a constant reminder that danger lurked where light barely touched. One evening, Kofi lingered near a busy market, watching Amale hurry past, her basket trembling in her grasp. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the way her shoulders sagged beneath invisible weight. "Amale," he whispered under his breath, a pang of guilt cutting through him. He had been taught to obey, to honor family above all else, but now a seed of doubt took root. The lessons of loyalty clashed with the stirrings of conscience, and he wondered if obeying his father came at too great a cost. Meanwhile, the city itself began to hum with a different rhythm. Neighbors exchanged quiet glances, murmurs of suspicion fluttered through marketplaces, and co-workers' questions lingered too long before fading into silence. Rumors swirled like wind through narrow streets, and Amale felt them press against her, invisible but suffocating. The city became a living mirror of moral scrutiny, reflecting the tensions she could no longer ignore. At home, the apartment was cramped, filled with the scent of boiled beans and worn cloth. Her mother, Nandi, watched Amale with quiet dread, sensing the burden her daughter carried. The younger siblings clung to her skirts, too young to understand fully, yet feeling the unease that hung in the air. "Amale, you do not have to bear this alone," her mother said softly, her voice trembling between fear and insistence. Amale shook her head, brushing back tears that threatened to spill. "I must," she whispered, "for all of us." The walls of their small home seemed to press inward, echoing the trapped feeling of both victim and family, a space where secrets weighed heavier than furniture or food. The tension in Amale's world mounted with each passing day. Fear and resilience intertwined. Guilt and conscience clashed in Kofi, and the city itself whispered reminders that injustice could not remain hidden forever. Every glance, every passing remark, every shadowed corner became a test of courage. And yet, through the cracks of despair, determination glimmered, a fragile, unwavering light that promised that even amidst suffering, the seeds of justice could one day grow. Kofi leaned against the balcony of his father's high-rise office, the neon lights of the city flickering like restless spirits below. The wealth, the grandeur, the power, all of it suddenly seemed hollow. His father's words, once guiding and commanding, now echoed in his mind with a weight that made his chest ache. "The world rewards those who take what is theirs," Oba had said. But at what cost? The faces of Amali, her eyes wary and haunted him like a drumbeat in the night. "I cannot keep watching this," Kofi muttered to himself, fists clenched. Every act of obedience that furthered injustice felt like a betrayal, not just to others but to himself. His heart ached as morality wrestled with loyalty, and the flickering city lights mirrored the uncertainty that clouded his choices. Could he confront his father? Could he risk the wrath and expectations of family honor? Yet deep inside, he knew that a man's legacy was not measured in wealth or fear, but in justice and courage. Amala moved with quiet precision through the bustling streets, each step deliberate, each glance cautious. She sought out those who could help, trusted friends in the market, a teacher who had once guided her, and elders whose eyes missed nothing. In whispered conversations behind closed doors, she began weaving a web of support, subtle and discreet. The city itself became both a trap and a map of opportunity, its maze-like streets echoing her careful strategies. Every dark alley, every flickering streetlight reminded her that danger lurked at every turn, yet hope persisted in the pockets of light she followed. Oba's mask of power began to fracture in subtle ways. A careless word overheard by a vendor, a flash of cruelty glimpsed through tinted windows, and the whispers of those who dared notice slowly spread. Even his polished image, reinforced by towering buildings and expensive suits, could not hide the cracks beneath. Neon lights reflecting off mirrored glass shimmered like fractured diamonds, hinting at the fragility of authority built on fear and manipulation. The city watched silently, waiting for the moment when his carefully constructed dominance would falter entirely. The pulse of the city pressed in on Amali from all sides. Alleyways were narrow, apartments cramped, and the marketplace crowded with people moving in unison, yet oblivious to the tension that simmered just beneath. Each step she took was measured, each decision weighed against both risk and opportunity. Honking cars and shouting vendors created a rhythm that mirrored her heartbeat, a drum signaling suspense and the inevitability of confrontation. Shadows stretched long across walls and pavements, blending danger and secrecy into a single oppressive presence. In this living maze, both fear and courage coexisted, and the city itself seemed to hold its breath, knowing that the next move would define the balance between justice and silence. Amale moved quietly through the narrow streets of the city, her eyes sharp and hands steady. Each step she took was measured, avoiding prying eyes, as she began recording the truth of her suffering. She captured fleeting moments, a hand brushing too roughly, a harsh word, the fear in her own reflection, and saved every whispered message that revealed the hidden cruelty of Oba and Kofi. Each photo, each note, felt like a seed planted in fertile soil, fragile yet full of promise. "One day, the truth will speak louder than their power," she whispered to herself, tucking her camera into her bag. The city's shadows, which had once seemed to swallow her whole, now reflected her determination. Each captured moment was a tiny shard of light piercing through darkness, a symbol that deception could not hold forever. Kofi, meanwhile, lingered at the edge of the marketplace, eyes shifting with a restless awareness. He returned a missing wallet to its owner, spoke a gentle word to a street vendor who had been insulted, and subtly shielded a child from a reckless cart. Each small act was unremarkable to the crowd, yet to Kofi, it was a step away from complicity, a choice to honor conscience over inherited loyalty. "Perhaps the world is not all shadows," he murmured as neon lights flickered above him, painting the walls with uncertain colors. The lights seemed to break through the city's darkness, signaling that even amidst corruption, change could begin with one heart willing to act. Rumors began to stir. Neighbors whispered behind closed doors, glancing toward Amali's apartment and noting the unusual visitors who came and went. Street vendors exchanged wary glances, gossiping about words overheard and actions noticed. The city, usually indifferent to suffering, began to pulse with moral scrutiny. A man who had once ignored the cries of the oppressed now frowned at a unexplained incident. A woman, hearing faint voices, paused mid-step to listen. The air itself seemed heavy with judgment, foreshadowing a reckoning that could no longer be avoided. Inside her small home, Amali's mother clutched her hands tightly, sensing both fear and the stirrings of hope. "Amale, what are you planning?" she asked, voice trembling. "We cannot face them alone." Amali met her mother's gaze, steady and unwavering. "We are never truly alone," she said. "The city sees. The truth will not hide forever." Each whispered plan, each documented proof, reinforced the lessons of betrayal and morality that African tales had always carried. Power could be abused, silence could enable evil, yet courage, patience, and cleverness could pierce the darkness, holding the promise of justice and redemption for those willing to act. The city, its crowded streets and narrow alleys, became more than a backdrop. It was a witness, a mirror reflecting choices, consequences, and the slow awakening of conscience. Shadows of betrayal and fear lingered, yet in every flicker of neon and whispered exchange, a seed of moral reckoning took root, preparing the stage for the confrontation to come. The city throbbed with life, yet beneath the usual clamor, an unfamiliar tension spread like wildfire. Crowded streets hummed with restless energy. Neon signs flickered erratically, casting sharp patterns over market stalls and pavement stones. Vendors paused mid-sale, glancing at neighbors with wide, knowing eyes. Whispers carried across alleyways, hopping over rooftops and sliding between the apartment blocks. Something had shifted. Even the children playing near the fountain sensed it, their laughter momentarily stilled by the heavy electric air. Above, dark clouds swirled ominously, reflecting the storm of reckoning brewing below. The city itself held its breath, as if aware that a confrontation long delayed was finally coming to light. Amala moved with quiet determination through the crowd. Her hands clutched folders and recordings tightly, every step deliberate, as though the very pavement guided her toward justice. Her heart pounded, but each beat was tempered with resolve. Faces brushed past her, strangers and friends alike, unaware of the courage threading through her movements. "This ends today," she whispered, voice firm despite the tremor in her chest. The crowd seemed to part slightly before her, her path, illuminated not just by streetlights, but by the moral weight she carried. Each stride was a symbol, a step in the hero's journey sung in the tales of old, where the oppressed dared confront the mighty, guided by truth and bravery. She stopped in the center of the bustling plaza, the chatter around her fading as if the city itself had shifted its attention. With steady hands, she presented the evidence: messages, photographs, recordings, and the accounts of those who had witnessed the abuses. Gasps traveled across the crowd, and whispers of shock and disbelief rose into murmurs of judgment. Oba's eyes widened, searching for a denial that could not exist. His carefully maintained authority began to fracture under the weight of undeniable truth. The neon lights above reflected off the surfaces around them, their flickering beams merging with the sunlight breaking through clouds, signaling revelation and moral clarity. The city itself became a witness, a living testament to accountability and justice. Kofi stepped forward, torn as he stared at his father and then at Amale. The familiar voice of obedience clashed with a rising call to conscience. "Father," he began, voice tight, but stopped as his gaze met the faces in the crowd. His hands shook slightly, mirroring the flickering streetlights above. Each choice pressed against him: loyalty to blood or loyalty to what was right. He thought of the harm hidden in shadowed alleys, the whispers of the oppressed, and the steady courage of Amale. The storm above reflected the turbulence inside. Him. Thunder rumbled faintly, echoing the weight of his decision. Every flicker of light seemed to ask him, "What kind of man will you become?" Finally, he exhaled, a long, deliberate breath, preparing to step onto the path of truth, whatever the cost. The plaza trembled with murmurs as Oba stepped forward, the weight of his reputation unraveling with each passing second. Faces turned toward him, not with fear as before, but with judgment. Whispers sharpened into pointed words, voices rising over the clamor of vendors and the neon glow of the city. "He cannot hide now," one woman muttered, clutching her child. "The truth has found him," another replied. Oba's shoulders stiffened, the facade of power cracking under the collective gaze. His eyes darted, searching for allies, but even the most loyal associates hung back, fearful of the growing storm. The city's pulse quickened, car horns blared, footsteps echoed on pavement, and the rhythm of the urban heart became a chorus of accountability. Every street corner, every shadowed alley bore witness to the collapse of authority built on deceit. Amala raised her chin, standing amid the crowd that had gathered. Her hands, once trembling with fear, now held the evidence with quiet strength. "I will not be silent," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. Around her, whispers softened into murmurs of admiration, and some brave voices joined, acknowledging her courage. The crowd itself seemed to embody conscience, moving closer, forming an invisible shield of validation and support. Eyes that had once avoided injustice now stared openly at Oba, reflecting the moral clarity Amali carried into the open. Her dignity, her resilience became a beacon, not just for herself, but for everyone oppressed in the shadows of the city. Kofi's chest tightened as he watched the unfolding scene. Each heartbeat was a question, each glance a choice. "Father, I cannot stand by this," he said, voice low but firm. He stepped toward Amale, subtly aligning with justice, a small but visible act that rippled across the plaza. The flickering streetlights caught his movement, casting him in alternating shadows and warm light, symbolizing the moral crossroads he had reached. In that instant, his internal struggle crystallized. The path of redemption demanded courage, even if it meant facing both his father's wrath and the city's scrutiny. The decision was no longer abstract. Action was his only path toward moral reconciliation. The city itself seemed to respond, winds stirring from the nearby streets, a sudden rumble of thunder overhead as if nature itself acknowledged the shift. Streetlights flickered, reflecting the chaos and upheaval below. A brief downpour began, washing neon reflections into glistening patterns on the streets, as though the city were cleansing itself with truth and justice. Onlookers whispered of fairness restored, of corruption laid bare, and of the power of courage against tyranny. The urban environment, crowds, lights, storm, and reflective pavements, spoke in unison. Wrongdoing cannot hide, and justice, though delayed, finds its way through vigilance, courage, and communal witnessing. The balance of morality, long tilted, had begun to settle. The storm that had gathered over the city slowly began to dissipate, leaving wet streets glimmering under a soft, clearing sky. People stepped cautiously from their shelters, their eyes sharper, their conversations quieter but more intentional. Mothers held their children close, whispering lessons of caution and courage. Merchants resumed their stalls, but a new watchfulness lingered in their gaze. Whispers of the confrontation earlier spread further, carrying the weight of truth into every corner. "The city has seen now," an elderly man murmured, pointing toward the plaza. "No secret can hide when courage stands tall." Even the narrow alleys, once shadows of fear, seemed lighter, as though the darkness itself had taken notice of justice at work. The sun broke through clouds, casting long golden beams that reflected in puddles and on the faces of those who had once remained silent. Change was slow but unmistakable. Amali walked through the city with quiet determination, sensing the subtle shift around her. Children waved shyly, neighbors nodded in acknowledgement, and a few brave voices called out, "Justice has a new voice today." She carried herself with renewed strength, knowing her actions had awakened not just her own moral resolve, but a sense of vigilance in the community. Kofi followed behind, his eyes no longer clouded by fear of loyalty, but brightened with conscience. "I must make things right," he whispered to himself, adjusting the papers and recordings he had discreetly preserved. Each step he took was deliberate, a small act of restitution and alignment with truth. Oba, now isolated, walked through the empty streets, the bustling city he once ruled with fear, now distant and judgmental. His influence had waned. Even his tallest buildings reflected the emptiness of his authority. Community leaders approached him calmly, their voices measured but firm. "Your deeds have been witnessed," one said. "Justice will follow." Oba's chest tightened, and for the first time, he understood the weight of betrayal, not just of others, but of the moral order he had disregarded. Shadows clung to him as he realized that wealth and power could not mask corruption when the collective conscience stood vigilant. Kofi, standing at the edge of the plaza where citizens now gathered, began the work of making amends. He met with those wronged, returned what had been misappropriated, and spoke words of acknowledgement and apology. "I was blind to fear," he confessed to a small crowd. "I now walk with clarity, to repair and restore." The steady glow of the city lights reflected in his eyes, symbolizing a conscience no longer wavering, a moral compass restored. Slowly, the urban landscape itself seemed to breathe with renewed balance. The city, once a maze of shadows and secrets, now aligned with the values of justice, courage, and communal responsibility. The air held a lighter warmth as citizens resumed daily life, but with a renewed awareness. Mothers taught children the lessons of courage. Neighbors spoke openly of fairness. Markets thrummed with careful respect. In subtle ways, the city itself had learned a story, the story of courage against oppression, of truth against deception. And Amale, walking steadily among the streets she had fought to reclaim, embodied the spirit of the tale: resilience, justice, and the quiet power of standing upright against moral corruption. Amale stepped into the morning sunlight, the city's streets open and inviting, no longer shrouded in the shadows that had haunted her days. Each step she took was lighter, her breath steadier, as if the burdens of fear and oppression had been lifted. She moved with quiet authority, her mind clear and her heart determined to care for her family. "Mother, we will eat well today," she called gently, placing fresh bread on the table. Her siblings looked up with wide eyes, hope blooming where despair had once settled. The market buzzed around her, but the hum of life no longer carried whispers of shame. In every gesture, helping a neighbor carry water, smiling at the children chasing birds in the square, Amale embodied resilience and courage. She had become a symbol in the urban community, a living reminder that strength could rise from suffering, and that survival was intertwined with dignity and justice. Her family gathered around the modest table in their small home, faces softened by relief and gratitude. "Amale, we feared so much," her mother whispered, her hands trembling as she reached for hers. "But now we can stand together." They laughed quietly, breaking bread, sharing stories of days past and lessons learned. The house, once filled with tension and silence, now hummed with warmth and unity. Walls that had seemed to close in on them now felt protective, a home rebuilt not just in structure, but in spirit. Each meal shared, each gentle touch, reflected a reconciliation born from courage, forgiveness, and the resilience of love. In the streets, the city watched and learned. Conversations turned from secrecy to open dialogue. Citizens no longer whispered in fear, but spoke of accountability and truth. Shopkeepers encouraged fairness in trade. Neighbors looked after one another, and young women walked the streets with newfound confidence. Amale's courage had sparked a subtle transformation, a community remembering that speaking truth to power was not rebellion, but responsibility. The alleys that once hid shadows of oppression now shimmered with light, their paths clear for honesty and vigilance. Children played openly where fear had lingered, and the marketplace became a symbol of communal integrity. As the sun climbed over the skyline, painting gold across rooftops and streets, Amale paused at the edge of the plaza. She breathed deeply, feeling the city's pulse align with her own. The skyline, calm and bathed in light, mirrored the restored moral balance she had fought for. Families walked together without fear, neighbors shared freely, and the air held the promise of new beginnings. Amali's journey, from fear to empowerment, from oppression to respect, echoed a timeless truth of African urban tales. That injustice may rise, but courage, truth, and collective conscience can restore balance. The sunrise marked more than a new day. It was the dawn of hope, of justice reclaimed, and of life lived fully and freely.